Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Hi, welcome back to Cultivate. I'm Ty Fischer, the head of school here at Veritas Academy, and we have a real treat today. We're going to be talking with Katharine Savage. She's the head of school at the Philadelphia Classical School. I think you were the founding head of school there, right, Katharine?
That's right.
Yeah, and she's also works with me on the ACCS board. She is the leader of our regional group here in the Northeast. More than anything else, it's been just wonderful to have Katharine involved in the movement. And I think my favorite thing about her is just that she's a friend of mine and that we get to interact. We're blessed here in the Northeast to be close enough to each other that we get to visit every once in a while. And I'm looking forward to being in Philadelphia soon to talk with her and some other leaders here in the region.
Next week.
Yeah, next week. So, hey, Katharine, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's great to chat with you today.
So we're going to talk about the power of communal meals to build up a community. And the reason for this podcast, or the inspiration for this podcast, really came out of a talk that you gave last year at the ACCS conference on Leaders Day, I believe it was. And just kind of explain, if you would, the thesis of the talk. And it was a wonderful talk. It was moving, Katharine, but I'm sitting there thinking, like, I'm at an education conference and we're talking about communal meals. And I had this kind of weird feeling. So tell me about how you got to it and what your thesis really was.
Sure. Well, for me, I did that talk, coming out of the COVID era, thinking through, how I built PCS and then how to sustain it going forward. And our modern world is moving so quickly. Everyone's so busy with many good things. And now there's so many quick and easy ways to communicate. And then that even accelerated even more with the pandemic, adding Zoom already to the smartphones and emails. And if you're in more maybe my generation, Marco Polo. But this communication without the kind of communion being together is not enough to sustain our Christian institutions. Well, just the onslaught of ideas, the attitude, the posture of the secular world in which we now live. And I knew this intuitively, but I was reading, I think it was an article, and Yuval Levin, who is an American political analyst and academic, he had this quote that I stumbled upon, which really encapsulated that idea. And it went something to the effect like that. I won't read the whole thing, but when we act together, when we interact with other people, there's an element of communication and there's an element of communion. So that's exchanging information, which we can do so easily and so quickly now, and then the element of being together. And the pandemic really forced many of us to separate these two out and not to have as much communion, but to have still plenty of communication. And he went on to say that we underappreciate the importance of communion in the things we do together. And to be able to still communicate is just not enough to sustain a lot of our institutions. And I really resonated with that. And I sort of built my whole talk off that. It was much longer than that. There's more to it. But I really think that is the core of thinking through building and sustaining Christian organizations in a really hostile surrounding world.
So, Katharine, it was just so wonderful to have that talk on communion and communal meals, especially in light of the pandemic. Isn't it staggering that during the pandemic, when we got more connected in a number of technological and abstract ways, that the numbers on how many people really just felt lonely just exploded. So we're connected to everyone all of the time, and we're lonely somehow. So, it was so great down in Frisco, outside of Dallas, where we had the conference, because it was the first large conference that they had in that conference center. And honestly, it gave just so much energy just being there and being together with people. So why do you think these communal meals are so powerful?
Well, I don't want to sound cliche, but really, I mean, they're powerful because God designed us for community and for relationships. We're not computers. You know, Zoom might transmit the information, but it doesn't impact you as a person in the same way. And I think for me, again, it's something maybe I knew, but the pandemic restrictions, they're especially strict in Philadelphia. It really brought this idea home for me. That communal life with other believers is on my list of essentials. The government in so many ways was telling, at least us in Philly, what was essential and what was non-essential. And that time made me realize, no, this kind of communal living is essential for Christians. Yeah. It tethers us to our beliefs, and it encourages us to be strong when we feel weak. It helps us better understand the people around us. And these are the people in our body of Christ that we must collaborate with to run that race marked out for us with endurance.
Yeah, it's so often, I think, that we as Protestants sometimes think of Christianity just as a doctrinal system, as if we can believe it and then just be abstract floating cells somewhere. And the truth of the matter is, if you're not connected to the body, if you're not thriving and flourishing in that interaction and those relationships, the doctrinal system starts to not make sense pretty quickly. So, you know, it reminds me not just of thinking about Christian worship leading to that meal of communion, but films like Babette's Feast. Have you ever seen Babette's Feast?
I did. I had to read that short story in high school, and we watched the movie as well. It really had a big impact on me, for sure.
Yeah. So how you can spend a whole lottery winnings on one meal is really what it's all about, and how that meal can be transformative. It's my favorite Dutch subtitled film, I think. So when you're thinking about having a communal meal, how do you get kids involved in the meal? How can it become part of your family life in a meaningful way?
Sure. Well, I mean, children need the same things adults need. I think maybe we overlook that because they'll be content to play and run around and do things like that. But I think children also need to be encouraged in their faith, and they need to build habits that they're going to bring with them once they graduate high school and once they go out into their own adult life. So I really think a lot about habits with my children. I have an almost 17-year-old, an almost 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So they're a little bit different stages and ages there, but thinking about the habits that they're going to need and modeling a kind of life balance that prioritizes investing in other people in an unhurried manner. Mm-hmm. You know, I know my husband and I, we want our children to seek godly community when they leave our home, and they won't necessarily do it if they don't miss it, if they don't know it's missing. And so giving our children a taste of that communion fellowship is important. It's an important way that we structure our life together in our family. We decided there's a certain time of the week that really works well for our family. We sort of set aside that set time where we invite people over, and we sort of rinse and repeat, and we make it a habit. And all the children have responsibilities and how that works together. And now it's almost just fun and easy. It's not even a headache. It's very seamless. Everyone just gets up. We know the time schedule. We know who starts what thing, and, you know, cooking and different things like that. And it goes together really well. So I think children can absolutely be a part of it, and it makes it easy for them to be a part of it when it's part of the routine and habit. It's a heavy lift if it's something you do once a year and it's kind of out of nowhere. But if it's something that you get in a regular routine of doing and the children are a part of it, it's actually really fun and easy for everyone.
Yeah, everybody kind of gets a muscle memory around it. In our house, it's fun to even think about building up the resources that we need with like glasses or plates, or so that we have exactly what we need. And that really helps to get to that commitment. But one of the things that you said there is just intriguing to me, because we have parents, you know, we know that the kind of world that our kids are growing up in right now is not friendly to the Christian faith. It's really unfriendly. And we spend so much time trying to get all of their ideas right. Mm-hmm. But if we don't live in a way that's enjoyable and pleasing to them and something that they will miss if they leave it, mm-hmm. then like we're leaving so many areas of temptation and problems for our kids. Whereas if we give them a life of that thick joy, it's really hard to walk away from.
Absolutely. And I think other kinds of non-Christian community do this. I mean, you're going to get pulled into some community. You're going to be a part of that. And it is so important to seek out and have that base of what real substantial life-giving community is, and not one of these counterfeit sort of situations.
Yeah. So Bob Dylan said you're going to serve somebody. So what you're saying is you're going to be served by somebody, or you're going to eat dinner with somebody, right? So we want them to eat a joyful meal with the right kind of underpinnings. So one of the things that discourages people from having meals is just to think about, what are we going to say or what are we going to talk about? So how do you foster good conversation at communal meals?
I do a talk for my upper school students on relationships around C.S. Lewis's Four Loves every year. So that text is always in my mind. And C.S. Lewis talks about friendship, and he talks about it as people standing or sitting side by side and both admiring or exploring the same third thing. So depending on how well I know the people who will be around the table with me, I'm going to intentionally ask questions to find our third thing. And that could start at low-level commonalities like gardening or baking and work up to shared philosophical or spiritual beliefs. But I think being intentional about how you talk, how you question, how you ask people what they're involved in, what they're interested in, what they love, that's a great starting point. And you usually find those places where you can have that shared third thing pretty quickly. And then it goes from there. If it's a larger group, it can be nice to prepare maybe a quote or reading a little brief paragraph excerpt from a book and ask people just what they think of it and ask them to respond to it and get ideas moving back and forth that way.
And there's nothing more pleasing, really, than a good meal with that good conversation wrapped into it. Emily and I have had that experience sometimes where we're sitting around the table talking and then someone looks at their watch and says, it's 11:30, like, holy mackerel, we've been here all night. But it's just been that pleasing time of being at peace with each other. But people have excuses. Like, if they say, like, boy, I just don't have the money to do this, or I'm too busy to do it. How would you respond to that?
Well, I am very busy. And so in some ways, I'm like, if I can do it, I know you can do it. I said this a little bit before, but we decided on a time that works for our family. So we decided that as a family, Saturday morning brunch from 10 to 12 is the best time for us. So we carve out at least 2 Saturdays a month, and we have exactly the same menu every time. Makes it easy. Like I said before, all my kids have different goals and how we prep. And then my husband and I strategically decide who we should invite into this pre-planned slots. Now, I mean, breakfast for dinner or breakfast for brunch or whatever, this is not expensive. Homemade pancakes, things like that are not a burden of cost, really. Yeah. And, I've done in the past things like, potlucks and things like that where everyone can contribute. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. I actually remember many, many years in college, there was the one professor who would always open up his home every night at 7 p.m., only from 7 to 8. And he lived near the college, and students can come over, and there was a prayer time and then a fellowship time. And it was kind of fast, but it was so meaningful. And every single week, his wife offered popcorn, brownies, and water. And that was it every single week. And,
but hey, if you're in college and someone says there's free food over there, there's probably a line.
Well, I'm from the South. And so Southern hospitality is a big thing. And so, I would say usually in the South, people, making it elaborate and fancy is sort of a little bit part of the culture. So that was actually a wonderful testimony to me that it could be simple. It could be really simple and just the same thing every time. And so meaningful and have so much impact. And I grew so much, and there was so much meaningful fellowship that happened in that one regular hour with the same popcorn, just salted, and water. Anytime you have that communal time, it doesn't have to require a lot of money. I think it requires intention, and it requires making that a priority, carving out that time, and making it part of the routine.
Yeah. So how have you seen this kind of effort bear fruit at Philadelphia Classical School?
It seems, again, like such a simple thing, but when I think about every board member, every key parent leader, every pivotal staff member, they've all spent time around a communal table with me or with another person on my team. And so I've literally seen PCS built from the ground up and sustain through difficult times in this way. It's not something that you read in your strategic planning book, but it is so effective. I mean, I even think about just building PCS. So now PCS is its own institution with so many players and partners. And it really started having monthly meals in my home, and I cook dinner for a lot of people. Now, those are much bigger undertakings, but it really connected people to this singular vision of starting a school.
And you mentioned there, this kind of stuff really helps you during challenging times, during trials, because you know people and you've learned to be able to trust them. And that trust is what carries you through times when you're facing real challenges, right?
Absolutely. So there was, within the PCS community, there were a really wide range of opinions on just living through COVID, and understandably so. Everyone had different things that they were dealing with and bringing to the table. And there was one particular sticky situation where I felt like there were some things that I needed to communicate to the whole student and parent community, but I wasn't sure how it would be received or if it could be received, if we could be unified. And so I invited, there's just some key pivotal people that I thought would be important to talk to before those things happened, and maybe people that would be able to talk to other people. And it was just a few, but those few breakfasts really went a long way in providing for the peace and, I would say, fortitude of our institution through some really tough times.
Yeah. So if a school or a family was going to get started with this, being intentional about having these communal meals, what's some of the advice that you would give just to kind of round this off? Because I always think it's really funny at the end of Dorothy Sayers' essay on the lost tools of learning, she says something like, well, no one will have the guts to try this though. And, that kind of baited people in our movement to trying some things. So really what I want to do at the end of this is just give some people some really practical advice, because I think that you said it so well at the beginning. God has wired us for relationship. And if we're not doing this regularly, we're not going to be presenting the picture of the gospel that we really want to present to our children and to the culture. And we're not going to be living in that joyful peace that we should be having as Christians. So it's just such an important point. I mean, there's a tendency, I think, to think of this kind of thing as superfluous when really it's right at the core. So what advice would you give to people who are just thinking about starting out and to encourage them to take those first steps?
I think that the best piece of advice I could give on starting out is do less. Do less things in your life. If you feel like this is too much, it's because you're probably busy with maybe a lot of good things, but too many things. That's a real challenge for me because I like to do a lot of things, and I will tend to be overscheduled and busy. My husband's been really great about just sitting down and talking about what are the main priorities that we're going to focus on, and do probably one or two less things than you think you can do, because you have to do these kinds of things, which I love how you articulated that so beautifully, just that sit at the core of what we need and who we are. To do those things, you have to have margins. You have to create margins. The margins won't create themselves. You have to create the margin. And this is a wonderful skill for students too, because students will often run everything to the last minute or fill up the time to the last second instead of learning how to say yes to the right things and no to even good things, so that you can create those margins. So I think that's really step one, and that's a family conversation.
Yeah. And I think that what you just talked about when you mentioned your husband, that's so important, that this is going to work if both spouses are committed to it. My wife and daughters do most of the cooking when we have a communal meal. In fact, they do so much of it that when I'm cooking, once my daughter Maddie said, why are you cooking? And I said, well, I was cooking so that Mom wouldn't have to today. And she said, but don't you want us to have good food, Dad? She knew that I was not going to land the plane in the right place. She's like, back away from the stove and I'll take over. So I might not be cooking, but I have a role of what I'm supposed to do. I'm like the table setter person and the arrangement person and the napkin person and that kind of thing at our house. But if Emily and I weren't on the same page, it wouldn't really work. Instead of that being a burden, that's actually a really fun way that you can work together as a family and as a couple.
Absolutely. I think that so many times the moms, we do naturally gravitate towards being the ones that plan and cook and get all the things. And, you do want it to have a sense of family. Everyone's bought in to doing it so that mom doesn't just feel kind of worn out. And I like the idea of routine. And maybe other people are better at doing lots of different fancy things every time. But I've found the way that I can be consistent in my life and in our family routine is to keep the meal really good, but really simple in a lot of ways. And just rinse and repeat and do the same things. And people actually talk about like the blueberry pancakes because if they come back to our house, they're going to have the same thing. So it's just become like one of those adorable trivialities, right?
Yeah. That anticipation makes those pancakes better than they actually are. They're probably really good, but the longing for those pancakes makes it even better. I was going to throw in one thing here because especially if you're a husband like me who's not really going to be at the cutting edge of the cooking, one of the things that I can do, that a husband can do to really encourage his wife in this situation is I do the dishes. So I tell Emily, you make a mess. Make any kind of mess you want. I'm going to clean it up. When you wake up tomorrow, everything will be back in its place and you can make another mess and then I can clean it up. But again, that's just working together as a family. Mm-hmm. So, Katharine, it's been such a blessing to talk with you today. And I really hope those of you who are listening just try to prove me wrong on this. Start doing this and you tell me if it doesn't feed something in your soul. Because if you start doing this intentionally on a regular basis, I think that you are going to say, how could I have ever lived without this kind of intentional practice in my life? So, Katharine, it was just really blessed to hear the talk and then really blessed to have this conversation with you. I hope that these words that you're saying and this idea that you're bringing into this broader discussion are ones that really people take to heart because I think it's going to bless them. So, thanks for being part of this today.
Thanks for having me.
So, if you enjoyed the conversation today, please subscribe to the Cultivate podcast, share it with your friends so that other parents can benefit from these conversations and enjoy them with us.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Leola, Pennsylvania. If you would like to learn more about Veritas, please visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.